Ramblers, and welcome back to Rees Rambles, my weekly podcast all about the latest comings and goings, movings and shakings, and indeed all the rest of it in the world of vintage and retro computing, gaming and technology. Hope you're all doing well out there, and it is a gloriously hot and sunny weekend once more here in the UK. Starting to sound a bit like a bit of a stuck record there, but you know, we have to appreciate these things and make the most of them. And I should point out that I have literally just arrived in the studio just a few moments ago. I've got loads of stuff to get on with this week, so the aircon isn't quite fully down to temperature yet. I've literally just turned it on, so I may be a little bit sweaty in the first couple of stories, but hopefully that situation will improve. And for those of you who were listening last week and wanted a bit of a Linkin Park update, I went down to Wembley last weekend to see Linkin Park. It was absolutely fantastic. They were brilliant. We got there really early. We made a proper day of it. Drank lots of very expensive, overpriced pints of beer, but I did find a place that was selling Goose Island IPA inside Wembley Stadium. So at least it made that a little bit more tolerable. But yeah, absolutely brilliant. So yeah, that was good. But of course, we're not here to talk about that kind of stuff, about the weather and about gigs and stuff like that. We are here to talk about computing and gaming, as mentioned during the intro segment. And I'm going to jump straight in with my first story for this week, because this is quite important and I want to get straight on with this. And I will just say, just before we do jump into this, that this was on my list for last week, but there was an hour-long video that had been released that kind of explained what was going on with all of this, and I just hadn't had the chance to sit down and watch it yet, so I didn't really want to talk about it with any kind of authority without actually having watched the video and gotten up to speed on what the latest developments were. But I am now fully up to speed, and that means I am in a position to talk about it this week. And if you haven't guessed, what I'm talking about is stop killing games. Now, this is a topic that I have covered in the past on Rees Rambles quite extensively, and it's something that kind of fizzled out. We had that parliamentary petition going on, and then we had a general election here in the UK, so all of that got wiped out. And you know, I think the campaign needed to kind of regroup and gather steam. I know there was some stuff that happened over in the US as well, with some laws that were introduced that basically kind of ended up shutting this whole thing down over there. And the distinct impression that I'm getting now is that this is very much up to us in the UK to play our tiny part, but most importantly, perhaps the EU, which sadly we are no longer a part of. That's a whole different story in and of itself. But yeah, if you're not familiar with what the Stop Killing Games campaign is all about, I will read the first couple of lines from the website, and then I will give you my take on it as well, so you are up to speed. So, over on the official website, stopkillinggames.com, I will say that this is an initiative that was started by a lovely guy called Ross, who has a YouTube channel called Accursed Farms, and he has done an absolutely brilliant job over the past couple of years of kind of, coordinating and organising all of this, acting as a kind of a cheerleader for it and getting the word out and kind of keeping us all up to date on the latest news. And it is indeed him who has created this website as well. So the introduction to the movement basically goes: Stop Killing Games is a consumer movement started to challenge the legality of publishers destroying video games they have sold to customers. An increasing number of video games are sold effectively as goods, with no stated expiration date, but designed to be completely unplayable as soon as support from the publisher ends. This practice is a form of planned obsolescence and is not only detrimental to customers, but makes preservation effectively impossible. Furthermore, the legality of this practice is largely untested in many countries. So, what does that mean what does that mean to us, the customers, the end users? Perhaps not even us, those of us who are kind of up to speed with all of this stuff, but, like mothers in the supermarket picking up a game off the shelf for their kids, all of that kind of side of it as well. Well, essentially what this means is that there are, of course, an awful lot of games out there at the moment that have an online component to them. Some games are, of course, entirely online. Some games are do have a decent single-player part to them as well, and the online is kind of an addition to that, an extra to that. And there are indeed some games out there that are entirely, basically offline, entirely single-player games, but they are connected to an online service for whatever reason. And what all of these games have in common is that when the publisher decides that running that online service, keeping those servers up, is no longer viable financially, they switch the servers off, and of course all of that stops working. And there have been some good eggs in the past who have kind of released stuff to the community, allowed the community to carry on running community servers and that kind of stuff. And, of course, companies that have patched games when they've done that to kind of remove that online requirement and allow people to continue to play the offline part, which is all great. And that's the kind of stuff that this movement is trying to encourage those publishers to kind of actually legally oblige them to support their games in this way, but also to label the games as well. Because, of course, it's all well and good releasing a game and saying, OK, we're going to keep the servers up for 2 years or 3 years or whatever. But a lot of shops will carry on selling those games and people will buy them. And, 2 years down the line, you pick it up off the shelf, you buy it, you install it, you start playing it. And then it could be a week later they shut down the servers. And you have absolutely no idea. So, part of the movement is about labeling these games and putting an expiration date on them and saying this game, has an online component or it has an online requirement. At the end of this term, the servers are going to be shut down and it's either going to stop working or we're going to commit to patching it or whatever else, just to, keep consumers informed and all of that stuff. And of course, putting at least some pressure on these game publishers and these game developers to perhaps have a patch ready for when that day comes, or some kind of documentation to allow the community to take over the running of the servers or whatever. It's all about improving consumer choice and consumer rights and improving the experience for gamers. And this is, as I mentioned, there've been some laws and things. I won't go into this in any detail at all, really, because it's not something that I understand. But there have been some laws over on the US side that have kind of really shut this movement down over there, which is really unfortunate. But there is still quite a big movement in the EU and indeed here in the UK as well. And essentially what this website serves as is a way to kind of point people towards the petitions that they can sign to put some pressure on those respective governments to try to enact these laws. So what we have here is a UK parliamentary petition here, and this has 150,480 signatures as at the time of recording, which is absolutely fantastic. And indeed, the threshold for these is 100,000, which means that our government has to debate this in Parliament. So somebody actually in Parliament will stand up and will say, we've had this petition, this Stop Killing Games thing, and they'll read it out, what it's all about, and or our MPs have to debate it and decide whether they want to introduce some kind of law around it. So it's quite a cool process, and this process has actually led to some new laws and things being enacted, so it's not completely useless. The trouble is, of course, we had a general election and, there was a petition that was already in process at the time, and that got shut down, and we've had to essentially restart this. So there is a new petition. If you signed the previous one, you do need to come and sign this one again. And one thing that I will say is that even though it has reached the threshold of 100,000 signatures, of course, these things are open to abuse. They're open to botnetting and spam and that kind of stuff. Not all of those all of those signatures on the petition will be legitimate. So it is worth adding your kind of real name and details to that if you are indeed a real person. And also, of course, the more signatures, the better, as far as convincing our politicians that this is a real cause that people actually care about is concerned. So, of course, this will be linked down in the description and all the usual places if you're listening to this on the podcast platforms. But the other thing, perhaps the bigger thing that I think I wanted to talk about was the EU petition. So there is an EU, it's called a European Citizens Initiative. And the EU Parliament has an awful lot of sway, particularly in the tech world as well. I mean, the example that I've seen cited around this is the iPhone and how they, of course, they use USB-C ports now rather than Apple's proprietary Lightning connector or whatever it was called. I'm not an iPhone person. And this was to do with essentially consumer electronics and waste, and just saying that, look, all phones sold in the EU have to have a standard charging port on them. So people can reuse their existing chargers and stuff rather than having to buy a different charger every generation or so of phones. And this was all, like I say, the EU has so much sway that, of course, it completely changed Apple's policy on their chargers on their phones. So, if we've got the weight of the EU putting pressure on game developers and game publishers to put this stuff in place, then that's going to be a net benefit for the rest of the world as well. So very much worth signing this. Now, one thing I will say about the EU stuff is that the requirements are much, much more strict than our own in the UK. And you need to provide proof of identity and all of this kind of stuff as well. Us in the UK aren't eligible to sign this because a few years ago we decided that we didn't want to be a part of all that for some bizarre reason that I won't go into. That's a whole separate debate. But the deadline for this is the 31st of July, so you only have a couple of weeks left to sign this if you are an EU citizen. And the other thing that I will say, and Ross at Cursed Farms did release a video on this just this morning, or maybe it was last night, is that, again, there's been some hints that perhaps there have been some fraudulent signatures and stuff, and people have managed to get around that ID requirement and stuff. And the EU are very, very strict on this, and they will write off anything that doesn't look legitimate. So even though this has also reached the threshold, again, it is quite important if you believe in this cause to sign this one as well. And yeah, so there you go. And again, of course, the weight of signatures, or the more the merrier, really. The bigger the numbers behind it, the more the politicians are likely to listen and perhaps do something about it. The other thing I will say is that there have been some in the community who have been questioning this and have been, arguing against it and saying it's all completely pointless, and we should be putting pressure on publishers directly, and we shouldn't be using the law for this and that kind of stuff. And that's all fair enough. Of course, those people are entitled to their opinions. But yeah, I am very much of the opinion that clearer labelling and clearer, keeping consumers informed about what it is they're actually buying and how much support they will expect on their games is very much a good thing. I mean, ultimately, you buy the latest version of Windows or whatever, and Microsoft are quite clear on when the end of life is going to be on that. Give people plenty of notice on that, and perhaps to move on and upgrade from that. Not saying that they're perfect, but the fact that we have that in the software world but not necessarily in the games world is perhaps something that should be addressed. Anyway, I think I've said enough on Stop Killing Games. As mentioned, the links will be in the usual places if you want to put your weight behind this. I have already gone and signed the petition, of course, the UK petition, and if you're in the EU, you can go and sign that one as well. Unfortunately, for those of you in the rest of the world, it's kind of waiting on the EU and the UK to do something. But I do think that this is a very real chance to perhaps enact something that will be good for the world of game preservation long term. And that's a cause that I can always get behind. So for my next story today, I want to talk about something a little bit less serious, a little bit silly. I think I spent quite a lot of time talking about Stop Killing Games. Yeah, let's have a bit of a weird diversion. The reason I'm chuckling to myself is because I'm looking at it on my screen right now. And I'm actually not sure where I first spotted this. It's something I've seen popping up in a couple of places on the internet, and it's becoming a bit of a phenomenon. And I wanted to draw your attention to this if you're one of the people who haven't come across it yet. Now, this is Theodore's Thick Coins, and if you're not aware of this, you're probably very confused by that statement. It's on the website called thick-coins.net, and here it is. Now, what has this got to do with our particular area of vintage computing and technology here? Well, of course, I think the main thing is the website. This website is absolutely fantastic. If we just very quickly scroll down to the bottom, we'll see here, website proudly built with front page 98 at the bottom. And to be honest, I don't doubt that for 1 second, based on the style and based on the HTML and stuff. This is a brand new thing that's literally just been built, and I assume it's all a bit of a joke. But this is very much in the style of this kind of late 90s internet humor, and of course, web design as well. So we have an animated GIF at the top. We've got this wonderful styling here with these boxes and these bright, crazy colours, green and yellow and pink. We've got a scrolling marquee at the top of the screen here, at the top of the page. And I suppose I should actually explain what the website itself is about as well. So, yeah, this is a guy called Theodore Thnickles, and it says here, hello, this is Theodore Thnickles, and welcome to my worldwide web page. And what he's doing, what he claims to have invented here, is something called a Thnickel. And what a Thnickel is a thick nickel, so the US coin, and essentially he's built some kind of contraption, some kind of press in his garage to be able to produce these things. And this is the kind of crazy stuff that people were getting up to and putting on the internet in the late 90s, No cynical advertising, no trying to sell you anything, no just doing stupid stuff for the fun of it and putting it out there for people to stumble across and have a laugh at for a couple of minutes. And this is very much up my street, and this is very much the kind of thing that the world needs right now. So, unfortunately, his first batch has sold out. I don't know if he did actually have any of these for sale, but there's an interesting story here about how all of this movement got started. Now, I'm not quite sure if I should spoil this for you or if I should leave you to discover it for yourself. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to link to the website because it is a good chuckle for a few minutes, and I don't really want to kind of spoil some of the jokes and stuff on here because this is brilliant. I love this. But yeah, there is a poster that you can download and print at home if you want to if you want to get in on the Thnickle movement. One thing I will say about the poster, this PDF that you can download, is that it is 12 megabytes. So yeah, to be honest, if this was a thing back in 1998 when a lot of us were still on dial-up, that probably would have taken you the best part of an evening just to download this poster, this A4 poster that you can print off. Of course, it has a QR code on it as well. I've noticed there's a phone number here as well. If anyone wants to phone him and see what that's all about, please do let me know. But yeah, there's a whole kind of lore developing around this, including a bit of a disagreement that he's had with his neighbour about these things. His neighbour agreed to get involved and help test them, and there's been a huge mishap, and they've had a big disagreement over it, and the whole thing is just ridiculous to read. But wanted to make you aware of this. It's something I've come across. I've seen it pop up in a few places. Perhaps you've seen it come up as well and not checked out the website yet. I love this. It's a great distraction for a few minutes, and it really did make me laugh. As someone who was around on the internet in kind of the mid to late 90s, very much up my street, and I would love to see more of this kind of thing. So from something light-hearted and fun to something altogether a bit more serious for my next story, and I just want to give a big thanks to Life-Size Teddy Bear for sharing this over on my Discord server. I think it's quite important to get the word out about this, and this is to do with what looks like quite a widespread scam. And I know there are a lot of us out here who think that we're smarter than the average bear. You see what I did there? And won't fall for these things. Of course, it's all too easy to click on the wrong thing nowadays. We're all in a rush. We've all got lots of stuff going on. And there's quite a very relevant angle to this as well. Because this is to do with a tool that's actually used to play older games on modern systems. So this is a post by Nathan Adams, dinnerbone.com, over on Blue Sky. And the post reads thusly: I almost fell for a scam site today pretending to be the homepage of an OSS project that I was looking for. OSS, of course, being open source software. It looked convincing until I scrolled to read more text. LLM slop is getting scary good at looks good at a glance. I don't even know how they manage this. Feeding LLM into LLM somehow. Of course, LLMs being large language models, as you know, or AI, as the kind of marketing buzz quite often incorrectly labels it. Though, to be fair, I'm down with calling it AI, if only because it's easier to say than LLM. But yeah, there's a screenshot of a website here, and it all looks very convincing, very official. But once you start to read into the text and kind of pick it apart and look at it, there are some oddities and some bits that don't quite make sense. But to be fair, a lot more polished and a lot better written than kind of 99% of the scam stuff that you see out there. And this was impersonating the download page for a tool called DXWND, which, as I mentioned, is a tool that allows you to run older games on modern systems. As Nathan explains, this was the first hit for me when I googled DXWND, a tool I heard about to help me play an old game on a modern computer. The other hit I found was a different LLM-generated website for this tool. The commonality, they both list the same email address. Googling that email and, yeah, there's a screenshot here of a huge list of websites that all, apparently, I'm not quite sure why they've used the same email address for all of these, because it does make them all quite easy to tie together. And of course, that was kind of the smoking gun that led Nathan to discover this whole thing. But yeah, it seems they are churning out these clone websites. And of course, these tools, these modern day so-called AI tools, these LLMs, make this really, really easy, make it trivially easy for scammers to churn out these things. And of course, in the past, these scam sites were always, they're always very rough around the edges, always a bit broken, always written in kind of broken English and stuff. And, weren't around for very long because they get uncovered and, they get shut down and whatever else. But these tools just make it easy. It's just easy to just endlessly churn this stuff out. So it's quite a big concern. And he goes on to post, there's hundreds, maybe thousands of these. I know many of these projects, and even I'd be fooled by some of these sites at a glance. OSS projects are under attack en masse, and I can only assume it's for malware reasons. I've not heard about this on such a big scale before. I'm in absolute shock. So there you go. And there's a bit of, there's some... some replies and things here, just kind of discussing this in a bit more detail. But yeah, so be on your guard, watch out. Of course, the thing is that browsers and things have all these built-in tools nowadays to help protect against this kind of stuff, but it's a bit of a cat and mouse game, and of course, these things only pop up on those tools when they get detected. And as they get more sophisticated, more realistic looking, and of course, they're easier and easier to produce, the fact that they're constantly being shut down and respawning elsewhere isn't really that much of an impediment to these kind of scams and things. So, yeah, an interesting story with an interesting retro angle and, of course, an interesting kind of technology AI LLM angle. Not something I'd considered before, and not one of the uses of this technology that I'd perhaps envisaged. But, yeah, be careful out there and, take a good close look at what you're clicking on. So I am a huge fan of Microsoft's original Xbox console, and indeed its follow-up, the 360. I had many a happy time playing on those consoles when they were current, particularly with my friends, Halo LAN parties and that kind of stuff. And I also think the 360, PS3 era is kind of where console gaming peaked for me, I think. I think it's all been about microtransactions and permanently online stuff and DLC and stuff like that ever since. Of course, that did start with that generation, and publishers did kind of start experimenting with that kind of stuff around that time. But I don't know, it seemed like a much more fun time and a lot less cynical than it can be nowadays. Perhaps that's just me being old and out of touch. I don't know. And yeah, of course, I have covered the OG Xbox on my channel. I did that HDMI mod quite a while back, and I do really need to get around to doing something with my old 360. It's sat on the shelf right next to me with all my games and stuff. It's I need to have a play with that. But yeah, of course, that console is kind of coming up for 20 years old. So what is quite surprising was Microsoft's move this week, which was to release an update for the Xbox 360. So thank you to Naoki for bringing this to my attention. I've gone out and found an actual news story about this rather than sharing the YouTube short that you posted on the Discord. So yeah, I think this is a better format for this particular podcast. So this is over on TheVerge.com, and the headline here is the Xbox 360 dashboard just got updated to advertise newer Xboxes. Now, there is an actual technical fix that was part of this update as well, so I will talk about that. Of course, the 360 originally had that amazing blade system, didn't it, with the things that kind of whooshed from side to side. No advertising whatsoever on there. It was a purely, it was a very kind of purely functional. I love the original blade dashboard, and to be honest, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find someone who was around in those days and owned an Xbox 360 from, when they were new, who kind of preferred what the newer one eventually ended up turning into. But that's probably a separate debate. So we're not talking about the Blades dashboard here, we're talking about the newer style one. So earlier this week, the story goes on, earlier this week, I can't read this week. No change from my usual performance, is it? Earlier this week, some devoted Xbox 360 users booted up their aging consoles to find that Microsoft had updated the home screen to finally resolve an issue with box art. But in addition to that fix, several users on Reddit, as well as Kotaku, have confirmed the update also adds some sizable ads for the Xbox Series X and S consoles to the 360's dashboard, as spotted by True Achievements. And there is a screenshot of it here. So essentially, this dashboard, if you're not familiar with the Xbox 360, when you insert a game on a disc, it basically creates a little icon for that game on the dashboard. And people have been complaining for years that the aspect ratio on some of those was completely screwed up. So they were basically squeezing like a tall image into a square box, and it was stretching the image. There is a link to an example here, but I'm not going to click on it because there's some naughty language on there. But yeah, that's all you really need to know, and that's essentially what this update fixed, as well as adding these massive ads for the newer Xboxes on the dashboard. So you boot up your 360 now, and what's this? I mean, we've got, based on the actual content here, this is probably what, 2/3, maybe half if we're being generous, of the actual kind of tiles that we have here on the screen are taken up by a massive QR code, which takes you to the new Xbox website, and a big picture of the Xbox S and X series, which of course are the current gen consoles in that range. So yeah, it's not very nice of them, is it? I mean, presumably people aren't clinging onto their 360s because they're unaware that Microsoft continued to make consoles after that generation, and they needed a reminder or whatever. But again, it's just, this was something that started off purely functional. You had all your stuff there to make your life easier with your games and things. And slowly the ads have got bigger and bigger, and it's not serving the consumer anymore. It's serving Microsoft and their commercial interests. And my God, am I in a cynical mood today? But yeah, just a shame, isn't it? people fire up these old consoles for this kind of retro experience, this to relive their youth, the nostalgia and all of that stuff, and to have these big reminders in your face of the current world, the world outside, does detract from that. I think you don't. I don't know. You don't fire up your NES to play a bit of Mario World and have a big advert on there for the new Nintendo Switch 2, do you? That would very much detract from the experience, I think. So that is that. It goes on to say here on The Verge, just out of interest, Microsoft's last major update to the Xbox 360's dashboard came shortly after Microsoft shut down the 360 online store in July 2024, when it removed menus and tiles no longer needed. So I guess that's fair enough, bit of a tidy up. That update introduced a bug causing game thumbnails and box art to appear stretched and distorted on the home screen, but the bug has now been fixed. So there we go. And it says here that these ads on the dashboard, you can actually highlight them and you can actually press the button to essentially click on them, but they don't do anything. The links are broken. They don't go to any kind of website or online service or anything like that. If you do want to check out the links and go and buy an Xbox Series based on seeing this advert, you actually need to use your phone and scan the QR code that's on screen. So just adds to the pointlessness of it all, I think. But there you go. Interesting story about the Xbox 360. And apparently Microsoft hasn't forgotten that it exists, but very much treating it as an advertising platform rather than a gaming platform. Bit of a sad end, really. And again, with the frankly quite awful Microsoft news this week, and I do know people who have been personally affected by this, and this is absolutely huge, so I can't not talk about this. This, of course, is the layoffs that have been going on this week that have been announced at Microsoft, and indeed studios owned by Microsoft, and they've cut funding for some third-party projects that they were working with other publishers and stuff, and we'll talk about an example of that in a second. But I think the most up-to-date news on this, and this is something that's kind of developing at the moment, more and more information is kind of coming out of the woodwork, but the most up-to-date news I could find on this was over on Eurogamer.net. And the headline here is Microsoft Xbox layoffs June 2025. What's clear and what's not as the weekend nears? Has Avalanche's new game been cancelled? Because, of course, as would be expected with the pulling of funding and layoffs and all the rest of it, a few games have also been cancelled as well. So yeah, bad news all round, I'm afraid. This week, as widely expected based on earlier reports, Microsoft began another sweeping round of layoffs, its fourth in just 18 months, this time affecting thousands of people across the company. It's believed more than 9,000 employees have lost their jobs as a result of this most recent move, which Microsoft told Eurogamer were necessary to position the company and teams for success in a dynamic marketplace. Since the announcement, additional reports have surfaced, painting a clearer picture of the devastation wrought by Microsoft's latest cost-cutting measures, as well as the substantial impact on its Xbox division. Beyond the significant human cost of the move, which Xbox boss Phil Spencer insisted was necessary to ensure the enduring success of the company in a message to staff, further details on the specific studios and projects impacted have now begun to emerge. So, Rare's fantasy adventure Everwild, Rare of course being very local to me indeed, first announced in 2019, has reportedly been cancelled, for instance, leading to the departure of studio veteran Greg Mayles after 35 years. Microsoft's troubled Perfect Dark reboot, Unveiled in 2020, that's one that I've actually reported on, isn't it, has reportedly also ceased production, and its first-party developer, The Initiative, closed. That's a sandwich, man. That's inappropriate timing, isn't it? Microsoft is also said to have terminated its partnership with Crystal Dynamics, which was called in to help on the beleaguered project back in 2022, raising questions around how that team may also have been impacted by yesterday's news. Elsewhere, an unannounced ZeniMax MMO has reportedly been cancelled, while 200 people are said to have lost their jobs at the Microsoft-owned Candy Crush maker King, and nearly 50% of staff at Forza Motorsport developer Turn 10 have reportedly been laid off. This is insane. The full extent and impact of Microsoft's massive organisational and workforce changes are yet to become clear, with Microsoft only providing limited information to press. However, it has, moved swiftly to deny rumours of Phil Spencer's imminent retirement, insisting the Xbox boss won't be retiring from his position anytime soon. No, he's just going to go on to become one of the most hated people in the industry. That's me talking, not Eurogamer, I should probably say. It isn't just projects within Microsoft that have been affected too. Romero Games, that's the one I was going to talk about in a second. The small Irish developer set up and run by Brenda Romero and John Romero has had the funding pulled on its new shooter, effectively ending the project. And a trailer for Contraband, the co-op smuggling game by Swedish outfit Avalanche Games, has disappeared from Xbox's YouTube channel, raising questions about the health of the project, with new reports continuing to surface around this week's bombshell, its impact on Xbox. We've set up this rolling news blog to sift through the confusion and to collate breaking news and industry reactions as the story continues to evolve. So, of course, I will link to this if you want to keep up with this over the weekend. But yeah, it looks like over 9,000 people across the world are losing their jobs from Microsoft first-party studios and indeed third-party studios affiliated with Microsoft and working on connected projects. And as mentioned, and of course I did talk a fair bit about John Romero last week, with it being the 25th anniversary of both Daikatana and Deus Ex. I did indeed see this announcement pop up from him, from John and Brenda, although this has been signed off by Brenda, I should say, who is indeed a very important person in Romero Games. Of course, they co-own the studio and also actively develop and manage the place as well. But yeah, it says here that they have some difficult news to share. I won't read this whole thing word for word, but essentially what they're saying is that they were working on a first-person shooter. The whole thing was kind of being bankrolled by Microsoft, and they've had to put that whole project on hold. Now, I have seen some speculation here that the team might end up losing their jobs, but I don't think Romero Games has actually officially announced anything along those lines. I know they're both good eggs, and hopefully they'll try to do the best that they can for their workforce. But, ultimately, if they were being paid by Microsoft, who knows what might happen. So yeah, the whole thing has been pretty disastrous for the industry. All that institutional knowledge, all those people who worked on games for, as the story mentioned, someone who'd been in the industry at Rare for 35 years is now gone as a result of this. And I'm seeing stories about this all over the internet and all over social media. And, of course, once that talent's gone and moved on to something else, it's gone. It's very hard to kind of rebuild that. So I have also seen some speculation that Microsoft are heavily investing in AI stuff, in LLM stuff, and that this is kind of their way of kind of freeing up some funding to cover that. Some AI conferences and stuff that they are, having a very big presence at. So, not wanting to put two and two together and get five or whatever, but it is kind of looking that is quite likely the case, just based on the speculation that I've seen. And if that's the case, what can you say? What can you say? So, not brilliant news this week for those in the game industry. As I say, I do have friends in that industry, and I do know of people who have been directly affected by this. And, I don't really know what else to say. So stay safe out there. Of course, best of luck to those of you who are looking for new jobs and stuff. And indeed, if you are in the industry and you are looking to hire, now is a fantastic time to pick up some great talent, I guess. I suppose that's the kind of the only positive angle we can take on this particular story. So let's move on to something a little bit more positive for my next story. Now, this is a console that I have reported on quite a few times in the past, which is particularly noteworthy, I think, because it was never actually officially released. Now, this is the SEGA Neptune, and if you're not familiar with the story of the SEGA Neptune, essentially, back in the day, there was a console made by Sega called the Mega Drive, or indeed the Genesis, if you are in the US. And there was also an add-on for that console called the 32X, which slotted into the cartridge slot, and then you would slot a game into that. Admittedly, there weren't many 32X games because it was not a kind of a big seller. And it did come quite late in that console's life as well, I think. But you could get one of those few games that were available for the 32X and slot it in there. And those games were a bit more sophisticated than the standard games on the Mega Drive. It added a bit of extra processing power, slightly better kind of capabilities, but not really a generational leap in hardware, I think it's fair to say. But Sega did decide that it would be worthwhile to integrate those two things into one console. And they officially announced this, and they released, specs and photos and press releases and stuff that actually went out to the gaming press about this upcoming console called the Neptune. So thank you to Thnickles for bringing this to my attention again this week, because there have been developments in the Neptune world. Now, I did mention that I had previously reported on this, and I should probably just very quickly talk about that. So There is a rather lovely chap who I do consider to be a friend of mine called Kosam, who's part of a group called the Board Folk, who do recreations of old motherboards for old systems and stuff. So if you've got a system that's got a properly rotten motherboard and you need to basically replace that, they will give you the Gerbers, and you can go to your favourite PCB fabrication service. I don't know if there's any specific ones I can recommend. And you can actually have your own PCB fabricated for that. And the group also produced a 3D printable shell for that. I don't think it was actually the group. I think it was someone external. But someone produced a 3D printable shell for that as well, based on Sega's original design and those original images and things that they released, and made this really cool DIY version of the Neptune. And a channel called Macho Nacho Productions, who, I'm a huge fan of this guy's work, actually went out and acquired one of these kits from the group and showed the whole build process as well. So, of course, you do need an original, I think it's the original Mega Drive. I think it's the US model. Well, it might be region switchable. It was a while ago I reported on this. So you do need an original Mega Drive console, and you do need a 32X, so obviously you can salvage the custom chips from those, which is destructive, unfortunately. But that's the way that it is. To actually build this thing. And as Macho Nacho showed in his video, bit fiddly, lots of surface mount soldering, very fine soldering, that kind of stuff. But the end result is absolutely brilliant. Really kind of professional, well-polished console. And I think he found in his video that it actually all just worked perfectly first time, and there weren't really any particular issues with that build, which was really cool to see. But of course, it's quite an involved process, and Tito over at Macho Nacho is an absolute genius at this, which unfortunately most of us aren't. Well, finally getting to the point of the story, if you are in the market for one of these Neptunes, and you think it's a rather beautiful looking thing, which I would certainly agree with, and would like to own one, but perhaps you don't have the skills to be able to build your own, or indeed you perhaps don't agree with cannibalizing existing old hardware to be able to build one, there is now a new option. This, as reported over on TimeExtension.com, is an FPGA-based Sega Neptune, and it is launching this December. So this looks really cool. The team behind the GF1 Neptune, an FPGA recreation of the Genesis/Mega Drive and 32X combo that never was, has announced that the machine will launch this December. Writes Damien McFerrin on Time Extension. Sega announced the Neptune back in the mid-90s, just as it was preparing to release the 32X and Saturn. The idea was that the Neptune would be an all-in-one Genesis and 32X combo, and while case mock-ups were shown off to the press, the system was cancelled when it became clear that the market for 32X was too small. Sega instead decided to concentrate its energies on the Saturn. I've just told them that, Damien. Dear oh dear. Anyway, so the story does go on to mention, obviously, that previous project that I just talked about. And you can actually go and you register your interest in one of these FPGA-based Neptune consoles. So there's a website for this, gf1neptune.com. The 32-bit revolution will start soon. And as mentioned, this is a project that is based in Brazil. Now, they have said that these will be available to purchase in December of this year, but they are just registering interest at the moment. So you can't actually order this just yet. Presumably, by the looks of the photo, I think this looks like an injection molded case, does it? It must be. And they also haven't officially announced anything to do with pricing either. But if that's something that you're potentially interested in picking up, and I would hope that they are using a beefy enough FPGA that perhaps you could run some other cores on this as well. So it's not just limited to Mega Drive and 32X games. You can go to gf1neptune.com. You can enter your name and your email address, and they will keep you up to date on the project. So another option there, of course, it saves some old hardware from being cannibalized as well. I'm not entirely against that, I don't think. Of course, a lot of this stuff has suffered damage and stuff, corroded boards and smashed up cases and things over the years. So there is a lot of hardware out there that can be repurposed, and if it's getting used, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But yeah, of course, there is a limited supply of that. So a brand new FPGA-based solution does sound like a very cool option indeed. And so, just before we dive into my regular video of the week feature, a couple of smaller bits and pieces that have come across my desk in the past week, submitted by members of my community. I thought these were quite interesting stories, but to be honest, I don't really have much to say about them. So we're gonna group them all together in this feature that is becoming increasingly regular on Rees Rambles. I don't really have a name for. I don't know if I need a name for it. Yeah, the Rees wrap up. No, because it's not me. Yeah, that's a bit egotistical, isn't it? Anyway, the first couple of submissions are anniversaries from this week and have been submitted by one of my favourite people, Mamo. So thank you ever so much for these. The first one is 40 years of Back to the Future, that much-loved film trilogy. The first one was released 40 years ago this week, believe it or not. And indeed, in that original Back to the Future, he travelled back to 1955, which seemed like ancient history at the time in 1985. But yeah, if we recreated that today based on the current timescales, he'd travel back to 1995, wouldn't he? Yeah, that doesn't really bear thinking about. Let's move on to the next story very quickly. This is another anniversary. This is 25 years of Diablo 2, or Diablo 2, if you want to pronounce it that way. And for that reason, I'm not going to mention the name of this game again. But yeah, this is a series that kind of passed me by, to be honest. I never got into these games, and I know there was quite a recent one in the series as well that has been quite widely well regarded and well received, but still wasn't enough to tempt me, I don't think. I don't really know why. I don't think I have anything against this type of kind of top-down RTS. Is that what it is? Dungeon crawler type game, I think? I think so. I don't know. Like I say, I've never played them. Just never got into them, which is a shame because based on what people tell me, they're pretty great games. And that's why I don't really have an opinion. And the third submission from Mamo is this one: WinUAE version 6 has been released. This, of course, is the very well-known and loved Amiga emulator. And this is version 6, so it is a major release, adds loads of stuff. They've had a major rewrite and stuff, all sorts of interesting technical details on the webpage here. And again, of course, that will be linked where you can go check it out in the usual places. And if you are a WinUAE user, yeah, highly recommended to go and upgrade to that latest and greatest version. The next one's from Steve's Tech Shed, or indeed from Steve of Steve's Tech Shed, that wonderful YouTube channel that covers all that great old IBM stuff. And this is Doom running on something weird. So, of course, I couldn't let this one pass me by. xdadevelopers.com. And someone has installed Doom on an exercise machine. And the best part is you have to sweat to play. So this is an elliptical, and we don't have those in CrossFit, so I am familiar with them, but it's not really something I have much experience of. But hey, installing Doom on something weird is something to be celebrated. And if you have to actually exercise and work out on the elliptical to actually make the game run and be able to play it, I think that's all the better. I think that's a very good incentive there. And finally, a story from the other retro Matt. Thank you for this one. This is, of course, I recently talked about ChatGPT being absolutely trounced at chess by the Atari 2600. Perhaps not unexpected. Of course, ChatGPT is a large language model and not a chess-playing AI, so to speak, or neural network or whatever. Yeah, someone has basically repeated that with Microsoft's own Copilot AI, as they market it. And Copilot has also been thoroughly beaten by the Atari 2600. The noteworthy aspect of this particular iteration of this story being that Copilot was apparently coming out with some pretty good smack talk before the game, saying that, it was going to win. And it didn't. It got beaten by the Atari 2600, as per ChatGPT. So thank you for all of those. Now, let's check out some videos. Or maybe one video. I don't know. I'll have a look at my watch history, and I'll get back to you in a second. There we go. I managed to find something. And so that brings us around quite neatly to my regular video of the week feature, wherein I feature a video that I've seen here on the YouTubes in the previous week that has entertained or enlightened or educated or otherwise improved my life in some small way. Quite often they are retro gaming and or computing related. Quite often they aren't. Quite often there's more than one video, and quite often there's just the one. And this week there's just the one, and it is very much vintage gaming related, and indeed related to a bit of a kick that I've been on quite recently, and something that's been covered quite widely, I think, in a lot of these kind of retro computing and gaming channels, for very good reason. And I'm talking about SteamOS. I'm talking about running Windows games under Linux. So apologies to the few people out there of you who are fed up of hearing about this. Please do let me know if you are fed up of hearing about this. I'm going to ignore you and I'm going to carry on with it anyway, but because I'm obsessed. I'm obsessed. Hopefully this phase will pass. But anyway, yes, this is an angle that I hadn't quite considered, and I thought this was really interesting. So this is another channel that I watch really regularly, Random Gaming in HD, and it very much lives up to the name. And yeah, this is to do with SteamOS and running Windows games under Linux, and something quite surprising, something quite unexpected. So the name of the video is, can SteamOS save these bad PC ports? And in this video, he installs SteamOS on his PC and basically compares on the same hardware a couple of PC games from recent years that are known to have some quite serious performance issues. You know, as described here, they are bad PC ports. So in this case, the games are GTA 4, one of my favourite games of all time, and Saints Row 2, which of course is another game very much in that kind of open world GTA type vein. And benchmarks everything thoroughly before and after running under Windows and running under SteamOS. I say running under Windows, he actually didn't get Saints Row 2 working because it's that bad of a port that it's just incredibly unstable and broken and just doesn't work at all on modern versions of Windows, even though it isn't even that old in the grand scheme of things. But both games, spoiler alert, as you might expect, run absolutely flawlessly under SteamOS, and they're super, super smooth. No stuttering or you know, jitters or frame rate drops or anything like that, which is pretty damn miraculous if you ask me. You know, running on a platform that they weren't even designed to be run on in the first place, and it even fixes some of the issues with these games. So I found it really interesting for that reason, because I have found myself that you know, running stuff under Bazzite specifically in my case does you know, has been quite a nice, streamlined and smooth process, and that stuff runs generally really well under that. And I have watched some videos recently comparing Bazzite to Windows, or indeed SteamOS to Windows, and started to come to the conclusion that stuff does generally kind of run a bit nicer, and you know, you get higher frame rates and stuff, and skip all of the kind of compatibility issues that you have with some of those older games as well. But for it to actually fix games that are you know, notoriously stuttery and you know, poorly optimized on PC, and fix all of those issues as well. I mean, where does it end? You know, I don't know. I mean, if I was Microsoft, I would be very worried about this. But hey, there you go. That's my video of the week, and I just found it to be another kind of interesting aspect. And for those of you out there who have shown quite a keen interest in my recent coverage of the SteamOS-based stuff, I thought it was, yeah, you know, just quite another interesting angle that I hadn't quite thought about. So there you go. It's called Can SteamOS Save These Bad PC Ports? It's 10 minutes and 13 seconds long, and it's on a channel called Random Gaming in HD. And one thing I will say is that if you aren't familiar with that channel somehow, it is well worth a subscribe, because yeah, he does cover all sorts of interesting things with old bits of hardware and stuff, and checking out old graphics cards that generally end up being better than you might expect, which is always quite a nice thing. You know, positive stuff. All that kind of laid back, quite positive style of coverage, which I quite enjoy. And that is that. So thank you ever so much for joining me once more for this week's episode of Rees Rambles, whether that be on YouTube, on my second channel, or indeed on one of the very many podcast platforms that this goes out on. And indeed, also, if you are interested in learning a little bit more about any of those stories, the links are in the usual places. The usual places being the description, or if you are watching this on YouTube, or of course, wherever those show notes and things appear in your podcast platform. I don't have a main channel video to talk about this week, so yeah, that's pretty much all I've got for you. I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I shall see you in the usual time and place, 2 minutes to midnight, Friday night, next week. Thank you very much once more, and bye.